Welcome, everyone. We're here at User's Guide for the Soul. We're having a great free class conversation. We're in a really good mood to learn some Kabbalah. So we hope that you'll join us at any point and be part of the conversation, including in the future, currently. Kabbalah. So we hope that you'll join us. And I'm going to try and turn that sound down. Part of the conversation, so, give me a second.
Is that an analog?
Here, I found it. No, I found it. Give me a second. We're just going to mute that Michael. There's just too many Michaels in the world, apparently. We want just one for the moment. Okay. Welcome, everyone, to this amazing Kabbalah class. We're in the midst of a conversation about how does the Shechinah dwell on something? What does it mean when the Shechinah dwells on something? And don't we know, even as kids, that God is everywhere? God is right here in my finger. God's in this mouse. God's in this space between my hands. If God's everywhere, what does it mean when the Shechinah dwells somewhere? What's this difference? How does the Shechinah dwell? If you've been curious, if you go back and listen to the last few classes and join us and learn, you'll have a powerful insight into how the Shechinah dwells above your own head and your life, and it's a beautiful thing to be able to channel into your practice as a seeker. So we're here in the Tanya on page 811, we decided. That's where we left off in chapter 52. And we're looking at this analogy that you and I are each a lamp of God. So you and I are each a lamp of God, and any analogy has parts, and all those parts want to correspond to something. So in this analogy, as we've learned, the wick of the lamp, you can picture in your mind a beautiful lamp with incredible light. It can be a very large lamp, more fancy than any that you've ever seen in real life, and it can the light can be beautiful and bright. And there's a nice wick in that lamp. And what is that wick? That is my physical body. That is my physical body. And perhaps put your own physical body into that lamp that you're seeing in your mind. Maybe be right there. Wow, look, this I'm here in this lamp suddenly. My physical body is the wick. Wow. So the wick is the physical body, the flame. Now, some people think, oh, the flame, that must be my soul. No, the flame is not the soul in this analogy. The flame is the light of the Shechinah. Thank you. The light of the Shechinah. So it's more than the soul. This is the source of the soul. This is this godliness that we call the Shechinah, and that's, so to speak, above the head of the wick. So if I'm the wick in this beautiful lamp, now the flame, the Shechinah, that is God's presence above my head. But something is keeping that flame on that wick, because if you just have a dry wick and you try and light it, how long will it burn? They can't hear your head shaking. Second, right? Boom! It's gone. It's not a wick. It's just a piece of string that you're just burning up. It's just burning nothing. For a wick to be a wick, it needs what? Oil. The third part of the analogy. And what is oil? The Alter Rebbe taught us way back in chapter 31, maybe 35. I lose track. 35. Torah mitzvahs, exactly. Torah mitzvahs. So hold on, the Alter Rebbe says, so here I am in my lamp. My body's the wick. This Shechinah is now attached to me above my head and flowing through my body, my physicality, my physical heart, my physical brain is all this Torah mitzvahs, everything we're learning now. It's all infusing this wick, and that's allowing the light of the Shechinah to cling to my wick and to have this beautiful flame above my head. And the Alter Rebbe stops in the middle of my trance. He says, hold on, Smolash. There's a problem. Oil is always chokhmah in other places. So why here is it Torah mitzvahs, other places it's chokhmah? We're exploring this issue. And the Alter Rebbe starts by explaining how it is that the soul enters the body to begin with. And that also is a mashal for how God enters the universe. Because I'm a little snapshot of God and you're a little snapshot of God. So the way my soul flows through my body, that's another mashal, that's another analogy where God's trying to explain to me the same way your soul flows into your body, that's how I'm filling the universe. It's a little hint. So the Alter Rebbe explained, first, the soul is pure, just one, indivisible, completely simple, we called it. And you can't say it has any parts. Then it flows first into the brain. And into the brain flows a packet of energies that you can say has the power of sight, has the power of cognition, has the power of locomotion. And from the brain, that whole packet now shines like rays of a sun into the rest of my body. So you got three components in how the soul flows into the body. The pure soul, it's essential, the packet of energies that flows in, and the brain that receives that packet to then distribute to the body. Same thing the Alter Rebbe is describing now happens in the universe. God's essential light is just simple, plain, uncompounded, indivisible, and infinite. But a packet of energies comes out, and we learned all the names for that packet of energies. Yell out a name. What's one of the names for that packet of energies? That's Malchus of Atzilus that comes out. The Queen, Matronita, Alma Discasia, revealed, Discalia. Yeah, Alma Discalia, thank you. Very good, you got it right. All these names we'll quickly go through before we dive into our text. There's a packet of energies that comes out that does have distinctions, that does have definitions, that does have energy that's catered to each level of the spiritual world. Each level of the spiritual worlds. That has to flow into some distribution center, like our brain, when our soul flows into our body. And that is what we've been learning about. That is Malchut of Atzilus. That is called the Shechinah. And there's lots and lots of names of that. And by understanding how our soul is flowing in our body, we're going to understand how this infinite light is flowing into the universe, how it condenses itself, so to speak, into a packet called the Shechinah, and then how the Shechinah can dwell one place more than another, like my soul dwells in my brain more than other places. So we were spending some time on this. We're sitting because it's a complex set of analogies that we're adding to this space in your mind, this picture, or this maybe it's a whole virtual reality in your mind that we each are a lamp. And the way that Shechinah dwells over us and over our life and what we do, it has a way to do it. It has a technique, a structure. And when you understand it, now we can apply it. We can apply it right now as we're learning Tanya. So last week we went over the names of the Shechinah, and this is all what it is that's dwelling over my head. So this is a very important moment, because it's important to me that my children have healthy brains and they drink their fish oil and they have their lecithin, because I want their brains to be healthy. Why? So their soul can flow healthily into their body and express itself through their limbs. Us too, if you want to function as a seeker and use this system in applying Judaism in the highest way, you want to understand what it is in the cosmos that's happening and what are all the behaviors of the Ein Sof at this point that allow for the Shechinah to dwell. So each of these names is a different function, a different behavior of the light of the Ein Sof, and how it's entering into the universe and how we can have it dwell over something. So we said, going over quickly, first name was Alma Discalia, the revealed world. So this is no longer hidden in infinity. Now this is energy that is meant to be revealed. We have some way of relating to it, right? And that is revealing what was hidden, as we said. Name 2 was Matronita, the queen. Why? Because a king is above the nation, and a queen functions to connect the king to the nation. So now the king, which is, if you're following the Kabbalah, that's the 6 midot and everything above it, that transcends the world. And Malchus Atzilus comes and says, honey, the world would like you to relate to it. So maybe, lower yourself a little. And the king's, okay, I'll sit down on the throne and I'll go out in the field and I'll smile at the people. The queen is just getting the king to relate to the people, same as what's happening spiritually when Malchus of Atzilus is taking all the light that comes from the other Sfirot and allowing it to now shine into something that can be a creation. 3, Imatata, the lower mother, because as we said in us, the emotions give birth like a mother to feelings. That's the higher mother. In this case, the lower mother is actually giving birth to possible creations, any possible creation. So there you go. That's Shechinah functioning as the mother of creation. And well, you were right. But the green screen's still there.
Okay.
And the Shechinah, that's the most popular name. We use it in a lot of mystical practices. The Shechinah has to do with dwelling, because this light actually dwells in every creation. Dwells in every creation. Now, is it actually revealed or not? That's what we're working on here. And finally, those were names relating to the light. These are names relating to actually creation and created beings. That's Em Habanim, mother of the children, another name for the Shechinah. And this is where each creation actually has a source, and the Shechinah is that source. So it's the mother of anything created. Oh, so beautiful. The source of all. Yeah, in this case, we're actually talking about souls, pardon me. These two are how the Ein Sof relates to souls versus all of creation. So Em Habanim is the mother of children, as in each of our souls comes from a source. And then finally, the last one, Knesset Yisrael, that relates to how our souls are all united at that source. And every person in humanity is all one point in Malchus of Atzilus. Knesset Yisrael, we're united in our source. So I know that's a tremendous amount of information. You can go back last week and look. We went through in more detail. Yeah, I hope you agree. We talked about each one. So now we're going to move on. And let's just dive into the text. So let's start very second paragraph, top of 811. V'chulan einan rak mehit pashtut hachayut v'haor mehamakor hazeh hanikra Shechinah. I think Eleanor, were you going to start? If you want to unmute for us, all of them.
Where are you on that page?
811, second paragraph, all of them.
Okay. All of them, all the worlds, creatures, and souls, being derived only from the extension of the vitality and light, which extends and streams forth from this source, which is called Shechinah.
That is describing each of us, our soul. What is it? It's an extension of the vitality and light that's in the Shechinah. So if each of us is a ray, the Shechinah is the one source of all those rays, and I could look at the sun, and I could be standing here, or I could be standing in Italy, and I could put, I don't know, smoke in the air, and I could see rays of sunlight going through that smoke. And so there's a ray of sunlight in Italy, and I could have another, this great, something in the air like clouds, and a ray of sun is coming through, or clouds in the sky, if you like. And there's a ray in Italy, and there's a ray here. But if you're a smart person, you look with your higher vision, that's all the sun. It's all sun. There's the ray of sun that's in the clouds in Italy and the ray of sun in the clouds here. They're both actually the same source. And if you travel backwards to where they came from, there's one sun, and they're all emerging from the sun. So that's us. Each of us is like a ray, and the Shechinah, that's the source for every single one of us. And there's just the sun. Inside the sun, there aren't rays of light that are separate. There's just sun in the sun. Yeah? In
a manner resembling the radiance of light from the sun, this radiance being but a ray from its source.
Makes sense? So each of us is a ray. Shechinah is the source. Aval Hashina Atzma, Shehi Reshit Hagilui Veikaro, Mash Ein Sof Baruch Hu Meir La'olamot Bifkinat Gilui. V'hi Mekor Kol Hamshachot HaChayut Shebechol HaOlamot.
But as for the Shechinah itself, namely the origin and the core of the manifestation, whereby the blessed Ein Sof illumines the worlds in a revealed form, and which is the source of all streams and vitality in the worlds.
And so the ray that each of us is, that comes into the world. And we're all coming from this source. But now he's going on to the next point, which is this package of light that's come from the essence of the Ein Sof, let's call it. It's come from higher in Atzilus. Even though this package of light is designed specifically to relate to worlds and create worlds, still the origin and core, right, whereby the light comes into the world and the source of all these streams of vitality, the Alter Rebbe is now about to make the point, the world cannot endure this light. as much as we've talked about different names of it and we can define the behaviors and we think we can wrap our heads around it, even this light that has already been concealed to the point where it can relate to creation, it itself is too bright. It would nullify all of creation. It would nullify all of creation. So if there was only the Shechinah, there would still be just godliness and nothing else. There'd be no created world. It would still be God one like before creation with no apparent creation at all, because the Shechinah is still infinite light that doesn't allow for anything separate. So we have a problem in the cosmos that if we want to have a cosmos, there has to be something that can receive the light of the Shechinah. There has to be this brain that is receiving the package of energies of my soul. We have to replicate that in the cosmos because that's the analog we're looking at. There has to be something that's capable of receiving this infinite light such that it doesn't nullify the world. And what is the brain in this analog? What is it? We already went through it last week, if you remember. What is it that comes from such a high source that it's able to receive the light of the Shechinah and then let it illuminate out and bring it down? Anybody? Starts with a T and an M. Torah and mitzvahs, very good. So we'll get to the punchline in a minute. Shekol hachayut shebahem eino rak or mihamit pashet mimena kaor hamit pashet mihashemesh. Go ahead, Paula, if you want to do our their entire vitality. Yeah, you want to. Thanks.
Okay.
So we're on 8:11, second to last paragraph, their entire vitality.
Second to the last, okay. Their entire vitality being no more than the light which is diffused from it, like the light radiated from the sun.
Right, so everything, even a whole spiritual world, its whole vitality is just like a ray from the sun compared to the Shechinah. Right, so everything comes from this, big and small. If shalalamo lisbol ulekabel or Shechinata shtishkoan v'titlabesh b'tocham mamash below levush hamalim mastir ora mehem.
Concerning the Shechinah itself, the source of all vitality for the worlds cannot endure or receive the light of this Shechinah, that it might actually dwell and enclose itself in them without a garment to screen and conceal its light from them.
Are you hearing that reasonably? We just have one mic in the room. Just give me a nod if it's good. Yeah, mostly, right? So the world would just be nullified. They couldn't endure unless they had some kind of a garment for the Shechinah to be absorbed in and then shine out through. They need something like the brain that's going to take this whole package of energies and let it illumine the whole universe and the spiritual worlds. Shelo yitbatlu bimtsiut legamre bimkoram kivitul or hashemesh bimkoro beguf hashemesh she'nireh sham or ze rak etzem guf hashemesh bilvad.
So that they may not become entirely nullified and lose their identity within their source, just as the light of the sun is nullified in its source, namely in the sun itself, where this light cannot be seen, but only the integral mass of the sun itself.
So now we're going to go into a different section. That is two questions. One, first, understanding how, as he's about to say, the Torah and the mitzvahs in the Torah, that is actually the garment, that is the brain, that is the Chabad of each spiritual world that will be able to absorb the light of the Shechinah and then let it flow into the world, just like my brain absorbs my package of energies from the soul and now extends the light to everything else. So first of all, how can the Torah do that? And that's simple because the Torah comes from a high place. But the second question, which you might be anticipating, is, hold on, let's talk about this really. If the Shechinah, which is just the very bottom of Atzilus, it's the end of the whole process, so to speak, Malchus of Atzilus, if that would nullify all the worlds and the worlds couldn't endure it, now how am I taking a garment that comes from Chochmah of Atzilus, the very start, the very top, right? The most powerful light in Atzilus, that has no problem coming to the world and we can just learn it, and we can unroll it here at Temple Israel, and we can do a blessing, and the world is not being nullified by that, right? If the lowest light in Atzilus would nullify the world, how can the highest light now come, and we're fine with that as a garment, and that can be here in the world, and that can transmit the light to the world? Why isn't that nullifying the world, right? It's a good question. Yeah, any guesses?
We must be able to filter it within ourselves.
I think it's because we can filter it, right?
Somehow, yeah.
Yeah.
All this stuff can't be coming out like nuclear radiation, and so there's some mechanism that we filter it.
Yeah, it's related to what the Alter Rebbe is saying, but it can't come from us, right? And that's the thing, like we're finite. So no matter what, if there's a light that's going to nullify the worlds, there shouldn't be something I could do. If I'm filtering, if I'm doing the filtering, there's no me to begin with. How am I filtering if there's no me and everything's nullified, right?
We have to put sunglasses on.
Right, there's sunglasses going. The Torah is the sunglasses. But if the sunglasses come from Chacham Atzilus, how aren't the sunglasses nullifying me too, right? That's this question. So the answer has to come from God's side, but it has to do with filtering. So you're halfway there, But how, and we'll see. The Torah is exactly like that. The Torah somehow is taking not just Malchus of Atzilus, but Chacham of Atzilus, but it's, like you said, it's filtering in a very special way, which we'll look at. Let's go inside. And by the way, if you internalize this, when you're learning Torah, it's the most incredible thing. Because when you understand what the Alter Rebbe is saying about what Torah is now, then it changes everything, because Torah is just connecting to this level of Chokhmah of Atzilus, but we'll get to it. But it makes you tingle when you're saying it. Ma'hu sheyuchal lahastira u'halbisha lo yitbatel b'mtziut be'ora u'ritzono yitbarech v'chokhmato v'chulu hamelubashim b'vatorah u'mitzvoteha haniglet lanu u'levanenu.
But what is this garment which is able to conceal and clothe it, the Shechinah, yet will not itself be completely nullified with its light? This is his blessed will and wisdom, and so forth, referring to the levels of Bina and Dat, which are part of intelligence, above as mentioned earlier, which are clothed in the Torah and its mitzvot that are revealed to us and our children.
So first of all, that's the third piece. Now we're finally filling in the puzzle of the analog, which is you got this package of light, that's the Shechinah. You got coming from the essence of God, which is indivisible, and then you have this Torah and mitzvahs of each world, the Chabad of each world, which is the brain receiving it, and it can, because it's not so impressed by Malchus of Atzilus, right? My intellect is not so impressed with what I'm saying, right? My intellect is trying to conceive of something so abstract, and it's going through my whole system, and now it's coming out of my mouth. My intellect is like, ha, that was the best you could do, trying to express this point of something, right? So the peak of my intellect is not so impressed with, wow, what, the sounds coming out of Michael's mouth. It's not a big deal to the peak of my intellect. Same thing here. The Shechinah would nullify all the worlds, but obviously to Chokhmah of Atzilus, which is the very beginning of Atzilus, this is nothing. This is not so impressive. I don't care. Happy to be a garment to absorb this, because this light is not so impressive to me. This light is the end of a system of refining the light that came in right through me, through Chokhmah of Atzilus. So I'm not impressed. I can easily be a garment and not be nullified. Make sense?
Who's not impressed?
Chokhmah of Atzilus. Torah. Torah's not impressed by the Shechinah. Right? The president of the United States is not going to be intimidated by, a conscript in the army that, has a strong opinion. The president's like, okay, I'm the very top of the chain of authority in the military. You're the very bottom. So you can have your opinion, but, I can hear it. It's not, it's not going to impress me. Maybe I'll agree with it. Maybe I won't, but you have no authority over me. So I can happily say whatever you want, spill your whole story, but I'm in charge, right? So here you got Chochmah of Atzilus that goes through all of Chabad of Atzilus and the Midot of Atzilus, and that flows into Malchus, and Malchus now is the Shechinah, and the Shechinah is like about to nullify the worlds, and Chochmah says, okay, hold on, just a sec, let me get in the way. I'll absorb this because I was the beginning of this whole thing. I'm not impressed by the Shechinah business, right? It's basically nothing to me, right? Make sense? Yeah, I'm actually going to pull that up on my, yes, keep that open. I'm going to pull that up on my slide. Look, we're thinking the same way. Right, so that's why. I'll do one more. Deoraisa mechochma nafkat hi chochma ila'a tilaela laela me'alma diskalia.
For the Torah
Or
issue
the-
of wisdom, namely Chochmah Eli.
Oh, Susan, I apologize. I don't have my
No problem, no
Yeah,
problem.
Susan, go ahead. Why don't you read that?
For the Torah issues from wisdom, namely Chachma Ilah, supernal wisdom, which is the level of Chachma of Atzilut, that is immeasurably higher than the world of manifestation, which is the Shechinah. I don't know how I mispronounced that other word, sorry.
Shechinah, yeah. So we said, let's bring up again. Oop, I don't want the view. Let's bring up our chart of the Sfirot that we've been using since day one here.
See if we were on the big screen, we could see.
It's true. If we want to have, like, we had the works, that's what we do. We'll get there one day, God willing. So here you have a map. We spent a lot of time with this map. It's from my teacher Laibl's book of the Sfirot as they are in every manifestation. This is how they are in our consciousness. This is how in our soul. This is how they flow into every one of the spiritual worlds. And this is even how they are in Atzilus, which is completely united with God. So this is the kabbalistic map of how to relate to the infinite, which should be impossible. And if you look through, you've got wisdom, understanding, and knowledge, which together make up Chabad, Chochmah, Bina, and Dat. That is the very top of any of these phenomena, as the very beginning of the world of Atzilus. We've got the second rank, love, strength, beauty, victory, acknowledgement, and foundation. Many definitions for these. Those six make up the emotional level, which is the world of Yetzirah, if you like. And then finally, we have Malchut. We're calling it royalty, but Malchut, that is the Shechinah when it's in Atzilus. So the Shechinah here, this one, is not going to impress this one, right? Wisdom. Wisdom is the very top, and Malchut's the very bottom. And by the way, we can see it in ourselves as well. If you separate this into three groups, the first group being the top three, and let's leave Keter out of it because Keter is above everything, and Keter and Dat are really one and the same. So if you look at Chochmah, Bina, and Dat, those three, that's my intellect in my consciousness. It's also the intellect of each spiritual world. In my consciousness, my intellectual flow, that is really just me on my own. That is me not relating to anything, right? When I think of something, it's just me and my intellect in its purest form. I'm in downtime. I'm kind of inside. I'm less relating to the world around me. And when it's just purely intellectual, I'm just looking at an idea, how I see it, without relating it to anything else or anyone else. So that's the most personal. That's the most just me. And same, of course, with God. If we're looking at God relating to creation, that's God's Chabad. That's just God coming up with, say, an idea, right? Like maybe don't eat this, right? There's no person yet to not eat it. There's no animal not to eat. It's just God with God, right? Then in me, once I've gone through thinking about something, now I might have a feeling about something, and that's these six here. Now in me, what's a feeling? Does a feeling relate to somebody else? Yeah, but it's how they are in me, right? So to have a feeling about something, you kind of need something outside yourself, right? And I've made a map of it, and I've gone through the intellectual, how I feel about it. But now it's like, okay, me and this person, now the intellect gets energy because I'm relating to something outside of myself. So if Chabad is how I intellectually perceive something on my own, now the emotions, the midot, that is how I relate to something else inside me, right? Ice cream. I remember that, right? The ice cream cone inside me gets me excited, right?
Is it abstract and concrete? Can you say that?
Yeah, it's more abstract and more concrete, or moving more towards concrete. But me just thinking intellectually about an ice cream cone, say I'm going to invent this idea. No one has made ice cream. I'm like, maybe milk could, and put it on a cone. I'm thinking about that's just in me. Now that I've tasted ice cream outside myself, now when I represent it, something starts to flow, and that's an ice cream cone inside me, or a teacher inside me, or a phenomenon inside, or a book inside me, right? So now I'm relating it to something else, but it's still how something else is inside of me. It's still contained within me. But now we get to Malchus. Here we are. Malchus, now I'm actually speaking to somebody else, walking towards somebody else, shaking their hand, buying something. Malchus is actually interacting with the other. It's the end of a product of intellect, just me on my own, emotions, how the other is within me. Now, finally, Malchus, I'm interacting with the other, right? So you see how in me, Chabad is much more just me on my own, and Malchus finally is me connecting with something else, really. Same thing with the analog, same thing with the Ein Sof, that the Chabad of the Ein Sof and Chochmah, where it begins, which is Torah mitzvahs, that's just God's self. There's nothing else. There's no other creation. It's way above that. Go down, you have the emotions. That's kind of how creation exists, but still within God. Now, finally, the Shechinah, Malchus V'Tzilus. Now God is, okay, let's start. let's have a conversation here where you exist, right? And that lower conversation where we exist, that does not impress Chochmah, which is still sitting there, just God by God's self. There's no creation. So Torah, and in fact, mitzvot, which are actually in Keter here, even above Chochmah, that can easily function as the garment that receives the Shechinah, and then the world doesn't have to get nullified. Make sense? Based on the Kabbalah. We'll stop the share here. And there's even, yeah.
What's the filter?
Filter is Torah mitzvahs.
Is the Torah mitzvah?
Yeah,
or
yeah.
the letters in the Torah?
All of it. So it includes the letters, it includes the ideas. When we say Torah mitzvahs function as the garment for the Shechinah, that could be learning about what happens when two people are holding a shawl and who gets it. It could be, reading the Haggadah. It's learning the Tanya here. It's learning the Aleph Bet in preschool. It's the whole Torah, everything about it. No matter how low it goes, no matter how concrete the analogy gets to, because it keeps becoming more and more lower and lower, as we'll see, like water flowing down. But no matter how far down it goes, the analog, the nimshal, is always still contained in the mashal. So you name it, everything, right? And that's the beauty of how this reframes Torah study, because you can be learning some very dry Torah. You can be going through like purity and impurity in vessels. Oy, is it boring to me? But if I understand that the nimshal is still in there, the point is that I'm connecting with the Ein Sof. It's the only way the Ein Sof flows into the world without nullifying the world is through this garment. Now it's exciting because I'm connecting with something. But there's a second piece, which this is a piece that's so high functioning in some of the, say, Kabbalistic, Hasidic communities, and which I think we sometimes just skip over in Reform Judaism, and we can really learn from this. We can really get a richer insight into the world, a different lens to look at the world. That is, it says in the Zohar, Kuchabrichu histakel beoraita ubara alma. God looked into the Torah and created the world. God looked into the Torah and created the world.
God created the Torah?
The source of the Torah is above Chochmah. Let's not talk about where Torah comes from, but Torah is above the worlds. Torah is before the worlds, right? And then how did God create the worlds? In the Zohar, God's like, okay, I got this Torah. That's my Chochmah. That's just me. There's no world. Now let me open it up and look into it. And That's how I'll create the world, right? By looking into the Torah. It's a little bit the same thing as we're learning here, right? The Shechinah, that's going into God's Chachma. It's hitting God's Chachma. From there, the whole world's coming. So the source of everything in the world is actually this vessel, this garment, which is receiving the light of the Shechinah. And from there, the whole world is emerging, right? So God looking into the Torah, that could be just God's Chachma itself. It could be the Shechinah flowing into Torah, whatever you want, every level. But all that is before anything you call a world. Now,
So that's the backside of the guts of Bereshit.
say it again.
That's the other
Oh,
side.
if you like, yeah.
backside, yeah.
So what this does is it changes. Let's not get lost in it's spiritual, right? So God looked into the Torah and created the world. Let's go with it, what it
Well,
means.
that's the blueprint for the Torah was one of the 10 things that was before the creation of the world, wasn't it?
The blueprint for the Torah was like the tongs. That was the blueprint for the Torah.
No, I thought the blueprint of the Torah was there before the world.
So the Torah is the blueprint of the world. Let's word it that way. Let's word it that way. All right. So some people think that there's the world, and the world is a physical place, and animals eat each other, and humans eat each other, and you can lose money and gain money, and if you don't get caught, it's fine. Those are the rules of the world. Then there's Judaism and Torah, which comes and says, you know what? There's one God. It's very abstract, but try and understand it. In this world, you might have many, many forces, but there's really one God. And there's a way of being, you shouldn't hurt animals at all. You should be always honest. You should, observe Shabbat in some way. And those are the rules of the Torah. And as Jews, to whatever extent we observe the rules of the Torah, that makes us good Jews. But we might lose out on the level of the world because that's not the rules of the world, right? The world is the opposite. You got Klippa, you got the world, and then you have Torah up here. And if I decide to not work on Shabbat, I'll probably make less money, but I'm a better Jew. So it's a trade-off. Good. Look at this wonderful Jew that closes the shop on Shabbos, loses that money. Look at that person that doesn't work on Sukkot and doesn't get that promotion because, the boss said, well, he's not really committed. So, someone else passes him over, but he's a good Jew. He kept Sukkot, but in the world, on the rules of the world, he's losing out there because he's being a good Jew. Fine. That's a way a lot of people see the Torah. But now if we take this model and we really take it in, say, hold on, if this is what's happening, God is looking into the Torah to create all this, and nothing that exists in the world, it only came through the Torah. It's all emerging from the Torah. The whole light of the world was received by the Torah, and from there it's shining in, and it's almost like Torah is not just a blueprint of the world, but Torah is the computer code that is running the world. And any screen that you could see, right? The screen of all these shapes moving around, or any screen you could imagine, or any phenomenon that's ever going to happen, all of it is just a program that's running on that code. So how can it be, if that's the code for the whole world, that if I follow Judaism and the Torah, now I'm trading off and it's not working in the world? That's the source code of the world. That's the source code of the world. And the last Rebbe of this tradition, Menachem Mendel Schneerson, was famous for teaching this and really inspiring people and saying, it's not possible that there's something in the world that if you actually bring it into the laws of Judaism, that it's going to be harmed. It's always going to be better. With such incredible passion. There's whole stories. There was this big shipping company called Sim Shipping in Israel. And there was a huge debate because it was a new company, a new state of Israel in the 50s, I believe. And they were getting going. This was the industry of the fledgling state of Israel. It was really important that it succeed. So they're like, you know what, we have to ship on Shabbos, but we're a Jewish state. We got to get permission from rabbis for these ships to keep sailing on Shabbos and not go to port and stop. Otherwise, the model can't function. You can't compete with other shipping companies. And 1/7 of the shipping time, you're sitting still. That would never be possible. So they went to the biggest rabbis and they said, we can explain, we can put the ships on automatic and there's no work that has to be done. And they're just going to keep moving and we're not going to break Shabbos and we just need permission because it's really important. And they got a lot of big rabbis to sign and say, that's fine. You can use this shipping company and it's keeping the rules of Shabbat. But the thing about the Rebbe, the Chabad Rebbe, when he first came to North America, and this was funny, a lot of people didn't understand why, when he was in Germany, he actually took engineering and became a graduated engineering program in Germany, right? Unusual to see this big Hasidic master in an engineering class, you know, with his sefer here and kind of listening with half a mind to the engineering class, you know. And a teacher once called him out on it, and he looked up from his book and then recited everything he'd said in the class and give a few points of how he could have explained it better. Like a quarter of his mind could pass a German engineering class, right? It was crazy. But why was he doing it? When he had to come to the United States, part of the way he got in was because he was an engineer and he wound up working in the shipyards during the war, helping build warships, right? So it turned out this Rebbe happened to be a trained engineer with experience in naval, whatever the word is, right? And he knew how ships work exactly. He helped design them. And he stepped in, he said, no. You may convince these other rabbis that you can sail a ship on Shabbos without breaking Shabbos. But then he went through many technical requirements of how you have to run a ship, from filling this and changing that and whatever, in detail, saying it's impossible to actually run a ship without breaking Shabbos, and here's why. And he insisted that this company would only survive if it stopped shipping on Shabbos. Now, in this case, they kept going. They didn't listen to him, and eventually they did go out of business. So that's not a miracle story. That's sort of a cautionary tale. But there's many stories as well of people that have been told, you know, the Rebbe said, you know, close your store on Shabbos and you'll do well and you get blessings. And they finally did, and their business didn't suffer. And then 9 months later, they had a child they've been waiting for, right? This morning, I saw a story about a business guy, and he was trying to move the small business he ran with his father out of Manhattan because they were always having to drive in and wasting a lot of time, wasting a lot of money. His father was convinced, but he said, first write to the Rebbe and make sure, you know, it's a good idea. So they called the Rebbe, and the answer that came back is, now's not the time to move your business. You have to wait. And the son was like, what does he know about the business? Why are we listening to him? And the father's like, sorry, what he says goes in this house. And so until the Rebbe says we can move, we're not moving, right? And months go on and months go on, and the son keeps calling and saying, you know, is now the time? And didn't you talk about this last month? Finally, at one point, about 6 months later, their landlord calls them and says, another tenant in the house or in the building needs the whole floor that you're on. So we need you to move. I'm sorry to kick you out, but we're going to give you 3 months rent. We're going to pay for all the moving expenses. We're going to pay for this and that. We're going to give you a bonus. And they give them this ridiculous deal, you know, the sweetheart deal to get them out. And so finally, you know, they called the Rebbe and they're like, okay, we got this deal. And the guy didn't even listen. Like the Rebbe's secretary, apparently the son explained, he's like, I was trying to explain to him like all the benefits you're going to get. And he like stopped me before I even got to him. He's like, okay, let me check with the Rebbe. He called the Rebbe, and the son was furious. Like, how could he not listen? This is so important. You know, he's just going to tell us again, we can't move. We can't give up this deal. And then they got the call back. The Rebbe says, now's the time to move. And the son is like, okay, I don't know how this guy knows nothing about our business, how it works, but I'm sold. He says, I'm sold. And they moved. And looking back, he says, if we hadn't waited until that moment, when I see now the expenses that really happened with moving and the amount of advantage this deal gave us, the company wouldn't have survived if we hadn't waited, right? This allowed us to survive, move to another location. Now that we're doing great. So all this to say, when you reframe this, one of the lenses is, if you're worried that something you're learning here or something you're learning at temple or some Jewish value is going to get in the way of the world, there's a connection you're missing, because the world only flows from Torah. And if we just learn this and it's interesting, fine, leave it there. But if this is how I'm doing my life, now I should know, you know what? If the Torah says tell the truth here, I mean kindly, but tell the truth. The Torah says be honest here in this dealing, be honest. I'm not going to lose out. It's actually going to be better. How it's going to be better, we don't always see. But That's the big reframe. There isn't the laws of Judaism and the ethics of Judaism and the oneness that we teach, and then the world, and to be a good Jew, you have to give up on the world. Actually, it's all just coming from the light of the Shechinah, and everything in the world works by this. And even if it looks like scary and it looks like you're going to lose out, you can trust that if you're attached to this thing, you're attached to the code of the universe, and you can proceed, still use strategies and be smart, but you can proceed. It's going to work out.
Okay. So, sounds good to me. The Torah is the blueprint of the world. That's what you said.
Yeah.
So prior to actually physically receiving the Torah on Sinai, was it already in existence?
Yes.
So it's always created. We just received it on Sinai.
Yes. Yes. So the Torah, don't think of the Torah as it was written at a certain point in time, right? I know we look at history. The question was, so did the Torah exist before Sinai, or was it created at Sinai? So it existed before, but it's not even time. You can't say, okay, God wrote the Torah, year 1000 after creation, and we got it in 2000 or 3000. Forgive my numbers, right? Because the Torah before is not before chronologically; it proceeds abstractly, spiritually. So the Torah is before the world means the Torah is before time to begin with. So time is coming out of the Torah. Time is being generated by the Torah. The Shechinah is the thing that can create time out of nothing. And the Shechinah is flowing into the Torah, and that blueprint, time is flowing out of that like one of these rays. And so is space. Space is flowing out. So the Torah is not just before Sinai. The Torah is not just before the world. The Torah is before the time and space that the world is in. And that's just time and space that we relate to. There's higher worlds that have this spiritual version of time and space, which doesn't have this and doesn't have this, right? It's something else. And even that, the Torah precedes. The Torah precedes everything.
That's
So-
not to say there's no time in the Torah.
Right. That's the reason why the Torah time is like, oh, I don't care about time. Time's after me, right? That happened then, I'm putting it here because the Torah has its own code, right? So time doesn't, there's no before and after in the Torah, right? Even though there's stories that flow into time, right? It gets very deep, but there's, we're going to talk about this idea that Shlomo HaMelech was so wise that he knew 3,000 analogies, 3,000 mashals, right? And you say, well, how is that wisdom? Typically, it's understood that, okay, I want to explain fluid dynamics or something to a child. If I'm Shlomo HaMelech, I'm so wise I could think of 3,000 different ways of explaining it because that's how nimble my intellect is, right? So I could come up with maybe 2 or 3 good ones. Shlomo HaMelech, 3,000. Like you can't compare it. But there's a deeper way of seeing it. What's that? What we're trying to do here, we're creating analogies, and above the analogy, there's another analogy, right? Because we took time, right? So you said, okay, did the Torah come on Sinai or was it before Sinai? So, okay, it's like, imagine it came at the beginning of creation, but then it emerged. That's an analogy. But then there's another analogy to explain that. It's like, time is just something coming out of a machine. Imagine it's like a Play-Doh thing that's squeezing time out. So time itself, the Torah is still before that, right? And then you could pick a bigger analogy and they keep nesting inside each other. Because for me to explain something to a 2-year-old, I might need more than one analogy. I might need to start with a very basic analogy. When they get that, now I pick another analogy to bring them a little closer and another. So when they say Shlomo HaMelech had 3,000 analogies, they meant to get from the point that Shlomo HaMelech understood within his own chachma, within his wisdom, to get it so he could explain it to me. He actually knew 3,000 analogies. Each one was a step down. Each one was a chunk down from the absolute abstract source, the analog, to get it down to me. And that's what Torah is. At whatever level Torah is functioning, it still has the nimshal. It still has the essence of the Ein Sof flowing into it. And even if it's come down, all it's saying is, you know what, if you steal something, you have to pay it back with this much extra. And it's very cut and dry. That's the byproduct of 3,000 levels of chunking down of analogies to get me from the source to what I'm understanding. But each time they did it, guess what was included? Chochmah v'tzilus. Right? Each time that was still included, right? So that's what we're dealing with. When you say like the Torah precedes what? The Torah precedes the world, what does it mean? The Torah is a blueprint for absolutely everything. And even though it comes down and is dealing with very physical stuff, it's still, that's the only interface that can A, receive the light of the Shechinah, and B, be in the world and relate to the world without the world being nullified. There's nothing else that can bring the light of the Shechinah into the world. Torah mitzvahs, that's it. Right? And so even Aleph Bet for a child, when you sit down, you teach a child Aleph Bet, they know because they're looking at the whole model in your mind, right? You might even know what you're teaching them. You might not even know what you're teaching them, but they're getting the whole wavelength through, and they're saying, "Oh, okay, Aleph Bet. This is different than this is different than how to tie a bow tie. There's something in here, right?" And that's why we teach kids Aleph Bet. Make sense? No, it doesn't make sense.
No, it doesn't make sense. I just find this whole chapter so far so overwhelmingly hard to understand.
It's a little bit, it's the last leg of the. Okay, yeah. Look, this is the home stretch of the Tanya. So he's going, he's finishing off in a high place for sure. But the take home, you'll see once it's all stitched together, the take home is quite simple, right? It's just like I have a new way of looking at Torah, and all that is allowing the light of the Shekhinah to dwell over my head, and your head, and your head, and your head. And okay, if I can get a little better map of the mechanics of it, that deepens, it puts it more in my deep structure, that model that this is how the Shekhinah dwells over her head. But in the end, you just do it, and you kind of have a simple sense that this is what's happening, and that's the key, right? And the details, I've learned this. It's probably my 13th or 14th time learning this.
Oh, so that.
And it's still, every time you go through, you're like, whoa, that's, yeah.
So this is our first time learning it.
Yeah.
That's why it's so difficult for us.
Yeah. So, each time I learn, I take in what I can get. That's all I can do, And let's do a little meditation. So this is where we, whatever we got in this mashal, whatever we got in this analog, we want to really amp up that lens that we use. So let's use our Jewish meditation to make sure that the lens is bright and the lens is maybe very big. You picture the little lenses from those little, what were those slide things, the round slide things called? And it goes
Yeah,
with the little slides.
yes.
What's the name for that?
Slide projector.
That was we called them. So instead of a little lens, we can make it really big in our mind, right? We're going to expand this. Instead of it being a lens outside me, I'm going to step into it. We want to bring this in so we're not just learning about this, we're creating a new perception, a new reality. So if you bring your body to a point of stillness, just a little scan through everything going on in your mind and your emotions and also your physical being. And just come to that nice, easy, settled place. Notice how the weight of your feet is landing on the floor, just relaxed, your legs on the chair. Torso can be nice and long, still flesh draped easily off your bones, arms hanging out of shoulder sockets. Yeah, head balanced beautifully, face smooth and relaxed, scalp just easy. Start to notice the pattern of our breath. Let's expand the journey of our breath into 4 stages. Count 4 to breathe in, if through our nostrils, if you can. 4 to keep the breath in. 4 to breathe out. 4 to remain empty, and then start over. So breathing in 1, 2, 3, full, holding it in. 2, 3, 4. Breathing back out. 2, 3, 4. Stay empty. 2, 3, 4. Back in. Nice and full. Breathing out. Staying empty. Continue that pattern on your own. Open up our wisdom gateway as we've been doing. That'll be the space between the end of the in-breath and the beginning of the out-breath. That open emptiness between the end of the in-breath and beginning of the out-breath will make that our wisdom gateway. Open it nice and wide. And just do it naturally in your own inner space. If it's taking up just a little bit of your inner screen, let's do a renovation and expand that and maybe make it 3 feet wide or 10 or even 20 feet wide. If you're seeing it far away from yourself, bring it nice and close, just inches from your perception. Maybe step right into it. You can be standing in that gateway. Give it nice, sharp colors. Now let's place in that wisdom gateway this concept: God looked into the Torah and created the world. The Torah is the blueprint for the world. This light of the Shechinah is emerging like rays of a sun from the Torah and mitzvahs. And we learn that we do at every level. And let that fill your wisdom gateway, that divine concept. So many facets, so much depth, and let that start to fill your mind. Yeah, notice what your mind is thinking about, what's filling your mind as well. Once it's filled your conscious minds, just start to notice how you feel about what you're thinking, what you think about what you're thinking. That's also part of the mind. It's another level of the cup we can fill. Perhaps you're meditating with joy about what you're meditating. Let the concept flow into that space too, the joy with which you're meditating on what you're meditating. Feel free to stay here for as long as you like, 10, 20 minutes. But notice before we come out, any different feelings about what's in your mind, any different feelings about the world that you've represented in your mind and the Torah. And if there are, enjoy that representation in your mind, because that is the beginning of a new reality. Yeah, nothing that exists in the world didn't start as a thought in some being's mind. This new vision you have, that is the beginning of a new reality you are creating. Just take some time to enjoy that. If you're here in class, we've reached the end, so we'll wiggle our fingers and toes and open our eyes, come back to Asius within Asius, down here in the physical world where we're doing our work. Been a pleasure. Hope everybody enjoyed. So if you want to join our class, feel free, email Maya at temple-israel.org. We're rounding the end of the Tanya. I'll be announcing a date for a big siyum, a big celebration for the end of the Tanya. And who knows where we'll go from there, but thank you for joining today. See you next time, User's Guide for the Soul.